I love it. Well, it looks like we are officially live. We're going to see. Always the litmus test on these things is when the chat starts to populate. So that's when I know the technology's working, that folks are showing up. But just wanted to extend a warm welcome to everybody here this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever it is where you are in the world. So thank you so much for joining us. If you're just popping into the live stream, go ahead and leave us a comment in the chat so that we know you're here and we know that the party's getting started. But first and foremost, oh, there we go. S. Lee, first one to hit the stream here. Good morning. Good to see you here. But as a point of introduction, I wanted to introduce to you our special guest here on the live stream this morning. I have Chelsea Cole with me from A Duck's Oven. We'll get into why that title and what that means and what Chelsea's into. But we are specifically here today to talk about your expertise, Chelsea, in cookbooks and specifically self-publishing and what you're also right in the middle of right now, which is creating your second self-published cookbook. So thank you and welcome, Chelsea. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am just so excited. I have been talking self-publishing so much this week and it fuels my fire. So I'm so excited to be here today.
I know. I think I got initially, I kind of came across you in the interwebs, right? Like as we do, we find people doing interesting things on social media. And all of a sudden I realized you had offered, you have expertise in sous vide and your cooking and your blog, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I suddenly realized she's got this self-publishing thing, and I've just published a book with a traditional publisher, but I thought, kind of throughout that entire process was like, what would it look like if I actually published this myself? And why would I maybe want to do that? And man, that seems really complicated and scary. But then all of a sudden I started to dig into your content and found it so interesting and so helpful. And so I want to be sure that we can share this with folks out there who have been thinking about that process of what would it look like to create a cookbook and what would it look like to self-publish that. And kind of also too, I think with both of us here, sort of that difference between the self-published versus the traditional publishing, that we can kind of share both sides of the equation. So thank you, first of all, for everything you've shared in the self-publishing world. It's so incredibly helpful. What sort of inspired you to want to share your journey in self-publishing?
Honestly, it was because when I decided to self-publish my first cookbook, and so quick note, I decided to self-publish, one, because I'm a little bit of a control freak, and we will talk more about that later. And two, I just wanted to do it. I didn't want to wait. I just wanted it to exist. Yeah. And I went through the process and it was so much trial and error, so much Googling, so much trying to find resources about how to do this. There are so many resources about how to self-publish, but there aren't a lot about how to self-publish a cookbook. And there are a lot of unique things that come with a cookbook. So I really wanted to create a resource after I finally, worked my way through the process so that other people wouldn't have to try to fight through the internet about how to do this. They just have it all in one spot.
I love that. That's such a great inspiration and reason for providing the service that you do. So before we jump into kind of more of the formal interview and getting to know you, because I do want to kind of give folks your backstory too, so that I think it really helps to inform some of the expertise that you bring into the self-publishing world. But for those of you who are here with us today, Chelsea and I want to hear from you. If you were to write your own book or cookbook, what would it be about? We want to hear, if you have a title or a concept, drop it into the chat. I think it would be so interesting because, I'm sure you've seen this too, Chelsea, how niche books can be in this day and age, right?
Oh my gosh. It's actually, so one of my favorite parts is hearing from people what their topic ideas are. In fact, when you sign up for the Cookbook Lab, you get a link to tell me about it. And then I send you a Loom video back with all my thoughts, because that's literally one of my favorite parts. And I also have, I think that the niche is actually incredibly important, because especially for those of us who don't have massive followings, who there aren't just necessarily this built-in group of people who are going to buy our cookbook because it's our book. If we're super niched down, we are going to be the search result for really specific queries, and we might be the only search result. So anyways, I think that the niche part is very important.
Super helpful. I love it. Oh, it looks like we've got interest in a cookbook on the Indian kitchen to the Russian auditorium. I'm like, what would that look like? That's awesome. Gluten-free, low FODMAP. Was it FoodMap? FODMAP? How do you pronounce that? I've heard it before.
Yep, I just went through the low FODMAP diet myself, so I would like that book, please.
So, and baking using sourdough, very, very cool. Crunch and Crumb, that's great. Very, very cool. Well, Chelsea, to kind of get us started and to kick us off, before we get into kind of the nitty gritty, because I have so many questions that I want to share with everybody here today about self-publishing, but take us back to, because much of your self-publishing journey started in food blogging that you create for your food blog, A Duck's Oven. But before A Duck's Oven, before you were food blogging, what were you doing, and how did the blogging and how did the recipe creation all start?
Yeah, so I've honestly been food blogging for it feels like forever now. It's been over 10 years, which just feels crazy.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
so I started
incredible.
my blog. Yeah. It all started when I was a sophomore in college at the University of Oregon, which is hence the title. The mascot is the ducks, so A Duck's Oven. My then boyfriend, now husband, actually named my blog back in the day. And at that time, I thought that I wanted to get into early childhood development. So I, throughout college, worked for the Brain Development Lab. And when I graduated, my first job was the behavioral lab manager at the Brain Development Lab at the University of Oregon.
Wow.
Wild. And then it was so funny. My blog at first started like as a way for me to document my learning to cook as a college student, and sharing that with other college students to show them like, hey, cooking is possible for us. You don't have to rely on top ramen and pizza. Like those are great, but you can do both. And it was funny. So my blog made me think, I love cooking so much, and like recipe development, that must mean I want to open a restaurant.
Oh,
and
no.
so no, hard no. And so my husband got a job after we graduated. We stayed in Eugene for a little bit, and then we moved to Portland, where we were both from. Because a job took him there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to find a job working in a restaurant so I can learn the ropes before opening my own. Yeah. And which I'm glad I did that at least. And actually,
absolutely. Such a smart move to like, what is this really going to be like?
Yes, exactly. Like I might as well not just like jump into this. And I was very young. I think I was 21 or 22 when we did that. And I actually managed to land a job as an assistant manager at a local restaurant chain with no prior restaurant experience.
Oh, wow.
So it's like you
must be a really good interview, Chelsea.
Well, I guess it was like open interviews. I think that's the only way I got it. And she just liked me, and it totally worked out. So I was an assistant manager for them for several years, working 60 hours a week, quickly learned this is not what I want to be doing. And then my husband decided to get his master's degree in political science, and he got it at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And so I went with him, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take this year to blog and freelance full time. Which was an amazing experience. And it was during that year I was doing a lot of freelance copywriting, and it started to click with me that one thing I loved about my blog and the whole blogging process was marketing. I loved learning about marketing, trying new techniques to get my name out there, things like that. And so when we got back, the restaurant group actually hired me. They kept a job for me, which was phenomenal. Wow. And they knew about my interest in marketing. They've been so good to me throughout my career, this group. And they gave me more marketing responsibilities. However, they didn't have any open marketing spots for me. And so eventually I found a job as a digital marketing specialist for a seafood startup here in Portland.
Nice.
And that's what started my marketing career. So from there, I actually ended up back at the restaurant group as their marketing manager for a couple of years, and then was through my cookbook, was hired as the director of marketing for a sous vide company, and did that for a year before going full time as a food blogger. So there's my
Yeah, that's amazing. So, but you, throughout all of that process and all of those changes and shifts, you were still food blogging.
Yep. So it was, I think like anybody else who's been blogging this long, there were times when I was working a lot harder at it than others,
Yeah.
but it's always been there. It's always existed. And I've 10 years of very interesting blog posts up on my blog.
That's incredible. But now, kind of at this point in your evolution and what I know you for, I mean, I've only known you, for a short period of time, of course, in that journey. But I mean, your real kind of focus at this point and where you've seemed to put a lot of that energy is into the sous vide. So, for those who are not familiar with sous vide, which sounds like a very fancy thing, can you just kind of break it down, share for people what is sous vide and why are you so excited about sous vide?
Yes. So it's funny that you say that because I discovered it, or I came across the concept about 5 years ago. And I had the same immediate reaction. I was like, this sounds too fancy for me, but it's interesting. And I had told my mom about it and I was like, but I don't think I'm going to buy an immersion circulator because like, this is beyond me. And then she just bought me one for my birthday.
Oh, yay, mom.
So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to learn this now. So just a quick crash course. Sous-vide cooking essentially means, I always tell people, an immersion circulator is like what makes a hot tub versus a little pool. So you use a device. There's also sous vide water baths you can buy, but an immersion circulator is the most common way to do it. And so this device circulates a little container of water and keeps that water at a perfect, precise temperature for you. Yeah. And so it's called precision cooking for this reason. So you put food either in a jar or you vacuum seal it, put it in the water bath, and it's going to literally perfectly cook your food for you. And this is especially popular for steak. Is like it's what I tell people to start with because it's the most impressive thing. Like you will have the most perfect medium rare steak you've ever seen in your life with sous vide cooking. But it's great for a myriad of other things. You might have heard of it thanks to Starbucks sous vide egg bites, which are phenomenal. It got popularized it then, and I just fell in love with it immediately.
Yeah. For those out there who have my book, actually, so in the food styling chapter, there is the steak. There's like the whole section on meats, and the steak that is pictured there was cooked sous vide. We took a big old T-bone steak because I was like, I went for the fancy one, went to Whole Foods, spent like a ridiculous amount of money on like the most beautiful steaks you could find. But I was like, I'm not going to screw this up. So we did it in a sous vide so that it was like that perfectly pink, and then just did a little sear on the outside, and it was gorgeous. So from a food styling perspective, sous vide is also super helpful because then you don't have like, I feel like when you cook things on the grill, like especially meats, like you have like such a quick change in terms of temperature that then visually too, it really impacts the way that the meat looks.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. It's one of using photography to show people the power of sous vide is awesome. Like I'll even do stuff like show them how the meat changes depending on how long you cook it. I get really nerdy and into it.
I love it. I love it. And so for those who are looking for sous vide recipes, of course, we can go check out aduxoven.com.
Yep, exactly. And I've got a ton of sous vide resources on there and starter guides and all that kind of stuff.
And then, of course, we also have Chelsea's book, self-published book. So for those of you who, this is kind of what also started the impetus of all this teaching, is going through the process of creating this book right here, which also is full of phenomenal sous vide recipes. Well, I'd be super curious for those of you who are in the chat right now, how many of you are there folks out there who are cooking sous vide? Just tell us in the comments, like, yep, I'm cooking sous vide. Or if you have a favorite thing you love to cook sous vide, share it in the comments. If you're not cooking sous vide, let us know that too. And I just think it's so interesting because I think it's something that it gained a lot of popularity, but still plenty of folks out there not sous videing. So
a lot of people are just a little bit afraid of it, which is actually, I created something else earlier this year called Sous-Vide School that just like helps introduce people to it. Like I literally teach a small section, like give them a little bit of information and then give them a lab. just to
That's
like
awesome.
get people to actually do it.
Yeah. You need that, like, for you, right? Like your mom bought you the thing. You're like, okay, well, I guess it's here and now I have to do it.
Exactly. Yep. It worked
That's
for me.
awesome. That is awesome. So you've gone through all these different like experiences and kind of found this focus and food blogging. So at what point, everyday sous vide came into the picture and came into your mind? And you kind of touched on this earlier, that you were sort of at this point, like, I just want this to exist. But why was a cookbook important to you? Like, what was sort of that reason? Because as you well know, it's like a massive amount of work. And maybe you didn't know that going in either, which I think a lot of folks don't know that going into it. But what for you was sort of that compelling reason to take what was a successful blog and add a book to the equation?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I think most, or a lot of food bloggers anyways, they aspire to write a cookbook. Like that feels like something you're working towards and want to do eventually. Not everybody, but a lot of us. And for me, that was definitely the case. So it was something that I always thought that I wanted to do someday. I knew that I wanted, because of the marketer in me, to be very strategic about like what I chose to write a book about. And so when I discovered Sous-Vide Cooking and like really fell in love with it, one of the first things that I did was found Facebook groups of other people who were doing sous vide. And I'm trying to figure out like the nicest way to say this. They were a little hostile, like not very interested in helping beginners, like lots of criticism about techniques. And I just didn't like that very much. And I also found it was mostly men in the sous vide space. So at the time, if you did a search for sous vide cookbooks on Amazon, they were predominantly written by men. And they were all very similar books. So all like really dark and masculine. Sous vide kind of, I learned, has a reputation for being a guy gadget. It's really popular among grillers and stuff like that. And I was like, my branding is pink. Like I
did we see the cover? Did we see the cover? Definitely not I mean, pink isn't everybody kind of color, but definitely this has, that female touch to it.
Yeah. And I was like, I really want to bring sous vide cooking to home cooks, not just people who are like obsessed with the technique and using it constantly, or professional chefs or stuff like that. I want like the everyday home cook to understand how sous vide cooking fits into their kitchen and into their like routines. And so that was the angle that I came at it with. And I was just like, I was so unbelievably excited about this that I couldn't not create the book. And of course, it was way more work than I anticipated it being. As with everyone, it was, and at the time too, I was working. We were in the process of finishing building our house. I was opening an Airbnb with my mom, and I was food blogging, and it was a lot.
Yeah, so much.
Yeah,
so much going on.
But it was so fun and so worth it, and it ultimately the things it did to make me an authority in the sous vide space was amazing. The doors it opened because of that was like, it was a lot of work for a short amount of time, and it totally changed my career.
Really?
Absolutely.
Just in terms of the ways that you can reach people with a book that you can't reach people with a blog?
Yep. And I always tell people, a blog is something you have forever. Like you are a blogger, like that is just a constant. Whereas with a book, it's this like new and exciting thing, and it gives people a reason to talk to you. So because of my book, I got to do live TV appearances, podcast interviews, like all these things, and just get in front of people because I had this thing to talk about, which is way different than your blog. It's just exciting, which I'm sure you're experiencing right now.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, and I think that the thing is, and I've seen this because you've been talking a lot about this week about self-publishing, because you are you're not reopening, it's been open, but you are updating and changing some pricing as far as your cookbook lab, which is the more intensive, like take people through the process, show them how to lay out the cookbook. Like I've gone through it myself, like as far as like how we plan it all out, the marketing, the branding, the formats, the layouts, how to work with Amazon, like how to do all the different things in order to make that book come into the world. And so, I think that it's interesting to see too, though, and people ask that question. I've seen you answer this before, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this. The idea of, is it something too to make you money, right? And I would, I feel like this is a great conversation, right? Because when we talk about publishing books, whether that's self-published or traditionally published, I would say don't do it for the money. What's your thoughts on that?
100%. And so if people know Diane Jacob, her book is Will Write for Food. Her newsletter is phenomenal. Like, I can't recommend it enough for anybody who writes about food. But she had a great newsletter, and this past week, and a couple of those articles really got my wheels turning this week. And I wrote a whole newsletter to my email list about this. Book publishing is just not what it used to be. It is a saturated market. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It just means that your reason for it shouldn't be the money. I don't want to scare people off by that. If you self-publish, and I can't guarantee anything for anyone, but if you market it decently well, you will make your money back. You will earn some money, but this is not life-changing money. This is not, my income now money. It's just like a nice little source of passive income each month. And so the reasons that I think you should write a book are to get your name out there, to establish yourself as an authority within your space, within your niche, and to create new opportunities for yourself to connect with new people. That's what it's really done for me. Like, since I wrote my book, I got a more senior day job because of my book. I've been on TV, been on podcasts, all that kind of stuff. I am now, because of connections that I made when I wrote my cookbook, a board member of the Portland Culinary Alliance. I work with the International Sous-Vide Association really closely, and all of these things wouldn't have happened if I hadn't written my cookbook.
Wow. Because it really is something from the standpoint of notoriety, legitimacy, that it proves that you're serious about this too, I think we could, go into a whole other conversation about the world of blogging and the, people's feelings about blogging and, serious blogging. I mean, to me, blogging is a profession, and it is something that it is taken very seriously, and there is a lot of money and a lot of opportunity. And, but, there's still sort of this, oh, that's cute, you're a blogger, right? Mm-hmm. And so, do you feel that way at all?
Absolutely. As of February, I'm a full-time blogger amongst many other things.
Congratulations!
Thank you. That's a huge part of my job now. And I feel very weird telling people that. And I even had a moment talking, my in-laws are amazing, but I was just like, what will your parents say when they ask people what I do for a living? I don't even know what people's answers are for that. And so, not that this is a reason to do it necessarily, but writing a book does help with that, because people can at least be like, oh, she's an author and a blogger. And that maybe sounds a little bit different. Again, not that should matter. Blogging is a hard job.
Absolutely.
But it definitely helps.
Yeah. But you're right, though. It is a way to connect. I think about the publishing of my own book, which, has, in terms of metrics and numbers, has been successful and such a wonderful experience. But at the same time, just looking at different streams of income and different ways that you can make money, the book was not a money-making venture. It was a way to connect with the audience, teach people in a way that's different, organize my thoughts in a way that I haven't before, but also then open up opportunities for connecting with people that I haven't connected with before, and a certain amount of notoriety. And, that those are sort of some of the compelling reasons, but there really needs to, like you said, though, be a good reason, because in terms of, take me back to sort of, maybe we don't need to go right back into that moment, but thinking about, you kind of go into this cookbook project, I think like anything, and you sort of got these romantic notions about writing it and what that's going to look like. I'm going to be at this desk and I'm going to be typing and it's going to be so great. And, then I'm going to take all these photos and that's going to be great. And then all of a sudden, the reality hits and you're like, this is a massive, you were just sharing, I think it was yesterday on your Instagram stories, here's my schedule to get all these photographs done. And holy moly, do you think I can do it? And I'm like, oh, bless you, Chelsea. Yes, you absolutely can. But this is a lot of work ahead of you, and you're dedicated and focused on it. So, kind of what would be, as you're going through those process, in those moments when you're like, I have bitten off a lot of work, what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated? What are the things that you're keeping in mind?
I think for me, I am a very like organizationally focused person. Like I really do like systems. I thrive on a to-do list. That's what works well for me. And I know that's not what works well for other people. But one of the things that I recommend to everyone, and I do myself, especially in those moments, I'll just sit down, write my publish date, my goal publish date, and then all the things that I work backwards. So what's the thing I have to get done before that and before that? And I think about how much time that will actually take me. And I just like write dates against that. And when I see it kind of broken down that way, it helps my brain.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I always remember, the beautiful thing about self-publishing is ultimately it's on me. Like if and I try not to lean into that too much because I did set a deadline for myself and I'm going to do my best to adhere to that deadline.
Yeah.
However, if something happens, it's on me. Like I'm not responsible to anyone, which is a very nice thing to just remind myself of.
Yeah.
So that's, and then like, luckily I am in a position, I don't have children and I have a very supportive husband and who, my God, has been eating so much sous vide experimentation lately. And so that, all of that stuff really helps. And I can rely on him and like my mom to kind of give me a kick in the pants. And my mom is phenomenal. She lives nearby and she'll come over and be my kitchen assistant.
Nice.
Which really is helpful for just like working with another human too. I think in any capacity, like my sister-in-law is helping me quite a bit. I'm paying her. Like this is the first time I'm actually using an assistant essentially to help me write a book.
Yeah.
And I think having another person to also be a little bit of accountable to is incredibly helpful, and just to help keep you organized too. She's been phenomenal for that. So.
Because I do see that, yeah, I mean, thinking about that journey as far as working towards deadlines, when you're the one setting your own deadlines, that's different than, say, having a publisher who says, we need these things because we are rolling out all these other things. Like we have, like when I was looking at the timeline of what I was doing for my book, it was like, no, like the photos are due this day because then we have these 10 other things that all these other people are responsible for that have to happen in this order. And so it's like that make or break, do or die. But, when we're looking at sort of that difference of, self-publishing versus traditional publishing, what are some things that, maybe people aren't thinking about that, or well, let's couch it like this. As far as like, certainly you have control over self-publishing versus traditional publishing, right? Like you can't just get a publisher to publish your book. Like there's the process, like they have to agree to all that. So in terms of that impetus for making that happen, but what are some of the advantages would you say that you've noticed? And two, I'm sure you've talked to a lot of folks who've done traditional publishing too. What are some of the advantages to publishing it yourself? Because obviously there's more work involved, but there's got to be some advantages to that, and why you're doing it again too. Because you're you're working on book number 2. So what are some of those advantages?
Yeah. So one of the big things that I always like to talk to people about is the world of traditional, and this isn't to say that you shouldn't pursue it if it's something you want to do, but the world of traditional publishing for cookbook authors especially has changed. So people who are getting like the big shiny cookbook deals that we've always thought of are now people who have massive social media followings, and that's pretty much it. I actually just saw Diane Jacob tweeted recently. She had a meeting with a publisher and she's like, we're exclusively looking for people who have 500,000 plus followings on Instagram to publish our cookbooks, and we're not really reaching out to anybody else.
Wow.
Which
That's
is interesting.
A massive audience.
Yeah. And so, smaller bloggers or personalities or whoever are getting deals, but a lot of times these deals aren't what they used to be. So it's either like I always tell people, so you can get, for example, one thing that's becoming more popular is you only get in advance, you don't get royalties, which isn't great because then if your book blows up and becomes an awesome thing, you're not getting a cut of that. And I feel like the attachment to the book is then gone. Like it doesn't feel like it's as much yours, like this continuing legacy of it. One way in which I think that's a great approach is if you get hired to produce a cookbook for, say, like Instant Pot or something like that. Like that's a different situation. Yeah. But so those deals just kind of aren't what they used to be, first of all. And then other reasons, I always talk about creative control and owning your book. So in terms of money, when you self-publish, you kind of choose how much money you're going to make per book. For me, the appearance of my books are incredibly important to me. So I make a lot less money than folks who are okay with a black and white book, which is totally fine. Like those are very educational, great resources. It's just different. And they're going to make a lot more money than me on per book, which is fine too. But you have that control, like you can determine that. And then two other big ways: creative control. I have a friend who I met at a cookbook signing event here in Portland. She traditionally published, and she hates her cookbook cover.
Oh, how's that?
Yes. But she didn't have a say in that decision. Like that was up to the publisher ultimately. And she hates it. And I'm like, and she's like, it's fine. Like, I love my book. It's great, but I really didn't want this for the cover. And I'm like, no, like, it's your baby. Like you've worked so hard on that. And every single little detail like that feels big when you get to that point.
Yeah.
And then another friend of mine, she has published 18 cookbooks. She's a super prolific author. All of them were traditionally published. And her favorite book is no longer one of her best-selling books. And the publisher decided it was no longer like essentially worth printing new copies of. And that was devastating for her. And so she's in the process of trying to like regain rights to her book so she can self-publish it and keep it running. Yeah. So there's all these reasons like that where you just don't have as much control over the book itself and over the process. And for some people, that's totally fine. And they would rather have that support. And another thing I'll add too, after I self-published my first book, I was reached out to with 3 different traditional publishing deals.
Interesting.
So it can be a great way. It can almost act like a proposal for you when you self-publish your book if you're still interested in traditionally publishing. Yeah. My mentor, my friend who has published 18 books, she reviewed all of my deals for me. Nice. And she told me to say no to all of them. So I took her advice. That's helpful. And that's not to say I wouldn't be interested in traditionally publishing in the future. I think with the right contract, it would be an incredible learning opportunity, and I'd be really curious about the process. But so those are some of the kind of big reasons.
Yeah. Because I think that it all kind of depends, right? It depends on knowing yourself, and are you going to be able to work to those deadlines personally, or do you need kind of that infrastructure of the traditional publisher? Do you have the opportunities for traditional publishing, or does this need to be self-published, right? Like you have nothing but options. It's just a matter of like understanding yourself and what's important to you. And, for anybody out there too, who is looking at, because there's plenty of folks out there receiving opportunities for cookbook deals. And so I think that's a really great advice right there. If you do find yourself in a situation where you're presented with an offer and you go, is this good? Is this not good? Because you don't even know, right? You don't know what the context is. And so finding other folks and asking those questions, it's incredibly helpful that's why we got to have friends in this industry, right?
Yes, absolutely. Just get another, and I think a lot of times too, just the fact that you're offered a deal is so flattering, not just flattering, but it's like validating. And so a lot of times it's tempting, and I absolutely feel that way myself. And it's just so awesome that somebody's recognizing your work. And so it can be easy to just say, yes, I'm in, let's do it. And without understanding the contract and what might be taken away from you. Getting another set of eyes on it is super important from somebody who's gone before you. And I'll say too, with the deadline thing, this was a quick thought. One thing that I found to be really motivating. So I am intentionally self-publishing my cookbook. My publish date is at the beginning of August. And the reason is it's a meal prep focused book, and September is big meal prep time. Yeah. And so like kind of setting a deadline where it's like, I know if I can get it done by this date, my sales are going to be better. It's very motivational. And like, I have a student right now who's like, she is going to be done before Black Friday weekend because she wants to take advantage of the fact that it's going to be Black Friday. And so there's little things like that you can like help yourself.
It's like that. That's Black Friday's coming, whether or not whether or not the book's ready, that's happening. That is a great point. That is great motivation. So thinking of that. Oh, we've got Taisia she dreams of shooting a book with desserts. That would be a whole lot of fun. All right. There's got to be some good sous vide desserts. Is there like a particular sous vide recipe that you're like desserts that people don't think of that they should try?
2.
Oh.
Sous vide creme brulee. You like
Ooh.
any kind of custard, sous vide is going to make it incredible because it's, again, precision cooking. It's going to be like perfect the whole way through. You don't think about it. And then cheesecake. So whenever I do book events, the thing that I sample is sous vide cheesecake, and it blows people's minds. It's not like a traditional cheesecake, but it's phenomenal. Highly recommend.
How would it be different? Like, what does sous vide add to the equation for cheesecake?
So you're cooking it in a jar. And you can do a crust on the bottom. What I usually do is like a crumble on top for that crunchy texture. So it's a little bit different in that way because it's not like this, it's not presented in a way that you're used to, which I actually love because it's perfect for like a dinner party because you've got all these cute little individual cheesecakes.
Yeah.
And I love it in that way. And then it's just like literally perfectly smooth texture. You're never worrying about an overdone outside and a jiggly center. It's like the same exact texture the entire way through, which is
The
amazing.
consistency factor. Oh, that sound okay. You've got me inspired because we have a sous vide here. Like we have an immersion circulator. I think it's the Innova we have.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it makes its appearance every so often, but I've not gotten that adventurous. So I feel like you've inspired me, Chelsea. We're gonna have to we're gonna have to do that. Ooh, and we've got some good questions. Folks, hold on to your questions. I've got a couple more questions for Chelsea, and then we'll do a little Q&A at the end because it sounds like folks are like bursting with some good questions. But one of the things, so I've been through the cookbook lab because I got so curious, as somebody who has gone through the traditional publishing route, and certainly it was an incredible experience. I personally loved the publisher that I worked with. They gave me so much creative freedom. They were really good at the things that I am not good at. And just from a time perspective, like the idea of laying out a cookbook for me felt very overwhelming, like connecting with, and I watch, like, I'm sure lots of folks here who, follow what I do are familiar with Kimberly Espinel and her self-publishing adventures, and just kind of like watching what she was going through. I'm like, wow, there's just so many things that a publisher is handling, which is why there is financially why they're keeping a lot more of the money than in that scenario. But for you, as far as like that process, one of the things that you share about in the cookbook lab that I thought was so incredibly helpful was the idea of branding and how to incorporate your branding. And I feel like this probably touches on that idea of marketing and what you're so passionate about. But can you talk to us a little bit about your approach to branding? I mean, obviously you kind of touched on bringing sort of a different visual perspective into it, but is it purely just colors? Like, what are some of these other things that maybe people aren't thinking about when it comes to branding and a cookbook?
Yes, I love this question. And it's funny. One thing that people will often tell me when they, or one fear that they have around a cookbook is like, I'm not good enough at this. I'm not ready for this, blah, blah, blah. When I did my first cookbook, I thought that I totally understood branding. I understand it way better now. Yes. And so any skill that you have, any knowledge that you have is going to be evolving constantly. Yeah. But branding for your book, I think is super, I believe in the power of branding across the board. I have brand guidelines for myself, and like that applies to my blog, that applies to anything I create for social media. Lately, I've had the opportunity to do presentations at events and things like that. My branding carries through to all of that. And that's so people, when they see me across the internet, they recognize my brand. And one of my favorite things, and I've gotten a little bit recently, is when I'm doing a presentation, they'll be like, "Oh, I know this is Chelsea. Like, I know this look." And I'm like, "Yes, this is why I do it. Thank you." And the same goes for your book. And so when your brand, like I'm actually in the process of doing the branding for my book right now. And it has overlap. It's like a Venn diagram with my usual branding, but it's a little bit different. And one of my favorite ways to get to kind of get my wheels turning with the branding for anything is to establish what my branding is and what my branding isn't. So for my first book, my branding was pretty playful, bright, and cute is what I would say. For my second book, it's going to be bright and I'm calling it modern fun, but it's not cute.
Yeah.
And so like even for my personal branding, another example, I use a ton of pink. But I always say my brand, even though there's a lot of pink and stuff like that, my brand is not romantic. And so Yeah, those things help me, like when I'm selecting props and stuff like that, or like when I'm setting up a scene. I know what my brand is and what my brand isn't. So I just remind myself of that throughout the process. And that goes for my book. So my second book is, yeah, like I said, modern fun. So when I'm selecting fonts, when I was selecting my backdrops, which I got a couple custom made from Capture by Lucy, I'm very excited about.
Yay! That's
Yeah.
awesome. Oh, I love
Uh,
Capture by Lucy.
she is so great. I like emailed her and I was like, you have this backdrop that I really like, but I want it in this color. Can you help me? And she like totally pulled it off. I'm so
She made
excited.
it happen. For those of you who are in here, I know people go bananas over backdrops. So Capture by Lucy is a great, she does like the roll up printed ones, but they're like super high quality. She's out of the UK, ships worldwide, and she's just a lot of fun to follow on social media.
And she's so delightful and supportive. Like I just really love buying her products, and they're amazing quality. And I always get the extra large ones. They're huge, so you
Yeah.
can do a ton with them. But anyways,
Yeah.
but so when I'm going through the branding process for this book, everything is through the lens of modern fun. And one thing we were talking a little bit about this before we went live, but that I'm so excited about is I also have a really consistent photography look that I'm going for with this book. And so I have over the last year completely fallen in love with like 5:30 p.m. filtered sun, which living in Portland, Oregon, doesn't happen often.
You have a very specific window of time to execute that.
And like only like 3 months out of the year where that's really possible. So I actually had my brother build me this massive diffuser. I'm so excited. He's like very handy. He's awesome. And so I am, and to have been learning the art of flash photography, so my photos can be consistent throughout the entire book. And people like another question I'll get asked all the time about that is I'm afraid of my photos being too consistent, like too boring, like everything's going to look the same.
Monotonous. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how do I make sure that there's variation? And one thing we talk about in the cookbook lab is like have 3 to 4 backdrops, get yourself a variety of props. And even though I know that you are like, work some things in different ways. Don't just be doing the exact same scene every time. But if you mix up the backdrops and the props, it's going to look more consistent than it is going to look boring. I think people overthink that just a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, that is such great advice. But yeah, and for those of y'all who are here and who are interested in the Cookbook Lab, and two, Chelsea's got some special events going on as well. All that is linked down in the description box below as per usual. So go grab those links. But yeah, you've been doing a bunch of live events. Tell us about the live events that you've been hosting.
Yeah, so a couple weeks ago, which you were a speaker at, this was one of my favorite things ever. We did a cookbook publishing expert event, is what we called it. And this was just like an idea I had on a whim, I think at like the end of April. And I reached out to my friend Jason, who also teaches self-publishing. He's phenomenal. He and I just have like different approaches to the self-publishing world. And and check him out. His Instagram is Make That Bacon.
Bacon. We love our bacon around here. So
right? In all the forms. The eating form, the money form, all the forms. But it was this phenomenal event where we had people from across the cookbook publishing industry, not just self. We had like literary agents, people who have traditionally published several books, speak about their experiences, and it was really inspiring. I like learned a ton from it.
I did too. I attended a lot of the sessions and I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, there is just so much to this and to cookbooks and to thinking about it. There's so many different resources out there. So it was a phenomenal event. Kudos to the both of you for putting that on.
Yay. It ended up being so much more than I expected. Like, I think we thought we would get like 4 speakers and we weren't really sure, but people were so excited to share their knowledge, which was really great. And so that was really fun. During that one, I did a deep dive on keeping yourself organized throughout the process and setting deadlines and things like that. And then this week I've been doing live webinars all about what it takes to self-publish a book, because people get a little scared about that, as we've been talking about today, and then why it's all worth it. Just as kind of like a reassurance and a moment of inspiration, because I think, regardless of whether you traditionally or self-publish, it feels like one of those things you never have time for, which of course I understand. Like I get myself in over my head constantly. But it's one of those things I really, really push people to do just because of the way it was a catalyst for my career and how I've seen it impact other people's careers too, especially if you capitalize on the PR and the marketing aspects of it. So
Yeah. Yeah. And it is so interesting, because I think in this day and age when everything has gone digital and everything is online and, that, you think, oh, all these like old ways of doing things are dying. Right. But like, people still buy cookbooks. I mean, in terms of, because your book, Everyday Sous Vide, it's available, of course, the printed, you can buy it on Amazon. It shows up. It's a physical book. Is there also an ebook version of it?
yes, and I love that you asked this question. Yeah, so I touched on this. There is a Kindle version that we just did a little bit ago.
Yeah.
And one thing like Jason and I both tell people constantly is if you're going to go through the work of creating an e-cookbook, you might as well self-publish it because the hardest part is creating the book, like creating the content. And sure, like when you go to actually self-publish a physical book, there's like some formatting stuff you have to deal with, but it's not a big leap to go from e-cookbook to printed book. And it costs you nothing with the way print on demand and stuff like that works nowadays, which is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And as you said, people, I mean, I know I've bought maybe 2 e-cookbooks ever. And I still buy, that's the one form of book that I still consistently buy physical copies of. And that's what people prefer, which I kind of love. So it's
Because
so
you say in the comparison of sales, I mean, I know for my own book, which is not a cookbook, but certainly sort of has some hallmarks of it that are comparable to a cookbook. But by far, the hard copy sales are much more. And the number of people that I hear from that say, I'm in a country where I can't access the hard copy. Like, how do I get this? Because I just want to touch it. I want to feel it. I want to own it. And I feel like that is so relevant and so helpful. And so I think that's a great suggestion because I think a lot of food bloggers, content creators, folks in the recipe space, like, okay, well, I can at least like bite off the idea of doing an e-cookbook. And so if you do that, like just take it that one step further, I think that can be a good way to get yourself there as well.
Absolutely. Because it's just a small step. People make it so easy now and you're not printing these things yourself. You're not shipping them yourself. None of that is on you. So
yeah, no, that's absolutely phenomenal. So, and I think you also have, did we talk about it yet? You have a guide or you have a special download that you sent my way. So I want to make sure that folks know what that is as well. That's in the comments below.
So it's a little workbook that teaches you how to determine your cookbook idea. So I like walk you through essentially like brainstorming different cookbook ideas. And then very importantly, how to validate that topic with your audience. Because we might be, and this doesn't mean you shouldn't do it for the record. Like if you have a cookbook idea that's like stuck in your craw, like do it. But also go through the process of finding out what your audience wants. And so this walks you through how to do all of that. Because you don't want to create something that isn't quite on for your people.
Yeah. You want to create the thing that's going to get them excited and that people are going to want to, they're going to want to buy. So that is phenomenal. All of that is linked down below, but we're going to go ahead and open it up for some Q&A for our friends who are here. So if you have a question, feel free to pop it into the chat and we'll pull it up. But let's see, we had some questions. Let me pull one of them up. Here we go. Pull it up onto the screen here. So would you mind talking a little bit more about marketing tactics that work for your self-published book? I'll let you take this one.
This was great for me. It was, I feel like this really ties back to what we're talking about in terms of like old school stuff. The old school stuff. So when I self-published my book, I think I had 2,500 Instagram followers. So not a huge audience. And I tried lots of things to get my book out into the world. And so I was lucky enough, I had coffee with a woman who locally does PR. And Portland is wonderful because the community is so supportive and everybody's just willing to share their expertise and it's awesome. So I had coffee with her and she's like, look, you can't afford to hire me, but you.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. I feel like more of us should have that take on life. Like, you can't afford me, but it's okay. I'm going to help you.
Yeah, exactly. And she's like, but you are charismatic, and like I think that you can do a lot of this yourself. So she like literally gave me her contacts.
Wow.
And like she's like, reach out to them and people will be more excited than you think to help you spread the word about your book. So honestly, the biggest thing for me is going on local live TV. Every single time I do that, I see a great spike in cookbook sales. And my favorite little story to tell is I cold pitched based on the contact she gave me, a local TV producer. And I told her all about my book. And I was like, I'm never going to hear from this person. Like, it's fine. And I was at work and I got an email back that was like, oh, sure, we'd love to have you on. Can you come on next week? And I literally just started crying at my desk. Because I was like, somebody wants me to be on their TV show?
Cool.
Like, wild. And that was amazing. And so I think I've been on over a dozen times since then.
It's amazing.
And gotten to do other TV appearances. And like the thing I quickly learned is local TV stations need content. And like food content is always fun content. So they're happy to have you on. And like now I do a lot of stuff from my own kitchen digitally. COVID has, made that happen. And what that means is I can go on TV all over the country from my kitchen. So that's been amazing. And then just lots of like pitching, podcast hosts, any speaking opportunities I take advantage of. Yeah. And then locally, we have lots of like holiday markets or like makers markets and food markets and stuff like that. And I table at a ton of those. Nice. And admittedly for my book, it's not great sales. I love getting out into the community and talking to people, but sous vide is like so niche and requires equipment and all this stuff. And so people either like know it and they come up to me and they're so excited and they buy my book immediately, or they'll come up to me and I like have this like thing rehearsed in my head and they're like, what's sous vide? And then I walk them through it.
Oh boy, here we go.
The 13th time tonight, like, let's do it. I'm ready.
You got this. Like you can do that script in your sleep at this point.
Yep. And then, I think too, one thing that's really important that a lot of people get a little freaked out about, but I don't really believe in like a secret sauce, is taking my followers through it, like making them feel invested in the cookbook writing process with me. So when my book comes out, they are more excited than anyone to tell the world about my book for me. And so I think that's really important to like make people feel invested in the process with you. So they share about it like crazy when it comes time.
I think that is such great advice and such a great way to connect with potential people. It opens up doors that it is this physical thing that you can, and one of the things too that I've found with a book is that it can be something too that you can send to people and like people you want to connect with and brands. Like I have sent it to different companies that I want to work with. It's like this legitimacy factor. So that can be another thing, like after it exists, after it's out in the world, this can continue to be this tool and this resource to help make you memorable and help you connect with and open new doors. So that is awesome, Chelsea.
Yeah.
I love it. Let's see. All right. Not seeing a ton of other questions. Is there anything that we didn't touch on, Chelsea, that we want to make sure to talk about today?
Yeah. One thing kind of related to that. So marketing and PR, like kind of my thing. I love them. Like it's what's really fun for me. And so this time when I did self-publish my last book, I didn't really know what I was in for. Like I didn't know what it was going to do for me. And I didn't understand the PR tool that it could be. And I was lucky enough to have a base understanding that helped me capitalize on it pretty well. But one thing that I'm doing this time, I actually did a 2-day boot camp with a PR strategist, Dr. Tiffany Urich. She's phenomenal. And I am really going hard with the PR. I actually have so much work to do for that. Every time I think about that, I'm like, but because I've seen the power of it, and she's actually now going to be doing a lesson inside the Cookbook Lab, which I'm really excited about. Nice. Because there's marketing and PR, of course, they're super related, but they are different. So like marketing for me is like a lot of strategy that's like very within the brand, and social media marketing to an extent, but PR is like more traditional. So it's getting your name in articles, whether that's digital or printed magazines. It's doing, again, more TV appearances, like things like that I just didn't, it's a completely different world. And that's been really interesting. And so I'm really excited to do that more aggressively this time around and see what happens and kind of share and yeah, we'll see.
Well, and that's the thing too, no matter which book direction you go, self-published or traditionally published, that is a responsibility on you to make those things happen. I'm
Yeah.
sure there are certain publishers out there that have, and I'm sure it also depends on the notoriety and the brand power of the author, but certainly, much of that falls back to you regardless of who's publishing your book, that you do need to have that strategy in place. And that was definitely something that I think came through throughout the event that happened a couple weeks back, that, you really need to have a plan of how you're going to make sure and enable people to want to opt into this, to participate in this and buy your book. So no matter which direction you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually learned that from, you might know Serena Wolf. Her book is called The Dude Diet.
Yeah.
She was talking about how she's traditionally published her books. And this was years ago. I heard it for the first time from her. She loves doing book tours, and that was really important to her.
Yeah.
You pay for your own book tour. Even if you traditionally publish, like that comes out of your advance, that comes out of your own pocket, which I thought was very interesting. So yeah, it's on you.
Mm-hmm. Well, so on that same note then, Rachel Jones has a great question about, are there hidden costs with self-publishing?
Yep. And I actually have another tool. I don't think I sent this to you to put in the comments, but you can go to aduck7.com/calculator. And I literally have a calculator that helps you get a ballpark idea of how much you'll spend to self-publish. And so I always tell people, plan to spend at least $1,200. And so this includes, you need the full Adobe suite, so paying the monthly fee for that. Obviously groceries for recipe testing, which if you're a food blogger, you're kind of used to doing that anyways. Yeah. And hopefully you're eating the bounties of that, so that's good at least. And then the other big cost that I didn't know about, buying the barcode, which is called an ISBN for your book, shockingly expensive. If you want to buy one barcode, it's, I believe, $195. Or you can buy 10 for $295. So I always buy 10. Yeah, because you need a separate one for the Kindle version of your book. And then I'm writing another book. So it was just worth it for me to buy multiple. So that's one. And then hiring people. So one thing I tell people, like, from my perspective, you're not allowed to cut corners on this, is a copy editor and a recipe editor. Because you will stare at your book until, and like, you will believe you've caught every single little thing. I promise you haven't. Like, I promise. Yeah.
There is on error in the first run of my book that is there, and people have pointed it out, and I was like, see, look, you're paying attention. I'm proud of you. So, because it's there, you can have a million eyeballs. And so, yeah, especially if you're the only eyeballs looking at it, it's not good. So get as many eyeballs as humanly possible on that copy.
And then the two other things that, like, I didn't really know about. One, and apparently I don't know if you experience this. Other people have told me this, at least for cookbooks, authors actually pay to hire an indexer, or at least cookbook authors. And so that's something interesting. And so when you're self-published, you could index it yourself.
Or it sounds overwhelming.
Yeah. And I always tell people too, by the time you've like pretty much finished your book, you're not going to want to look at it again for like several weeks at least. Like you've looked at it so much. And so I would hire an indexer. And that usually is like between $150 and $500, depending on the experience of the indexer. And then there was something else I was thinking of too. What was it? I don't remember now. But there's things.
We lost Chelsea. Where'd she go? Hopefully she popped back in. Great question. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there. Sorry.
She's back.
Oh man.
I was like, I guess the party's over. Guys.
Flew back in. But yeah, anyways, they're pretty much all listed on that document for those who are curious.
Fabulous. We got another couple questions popping in here. So as far as arranging legally, ISBN number, so you kind of mentioned that, copyright, all that jazz. That's all probably covered in the Cookbook Lab, yeah?
Yes, yep. So you need an ISBN, and then oh gosh, I wish I could like remember how to talk about this. It's not my area.
You don't talk about it every day.
Yeah, law is not my area of expertise, but essentially there are certain things that you create that like automatically have copyright associated. You don't have to purchase copyright for them, and a book is one of them. Yeah. I'm trying to remember, like I just explained this to somebody in detail in writing in a DM. So I'm like trying to tap back into that. But essentially it's like if you want to be able to take like more extreme legal action if someone does violate copyright, you can pay to have your book copyrighted, but that's not necessary.
It's like photography, right? The second you hit the shutter button, you own the copyright to that photo technically, and that would hold up legally. But if you, like you said, want to be able to take that action, you do need to go register that with the Copyright Office, go through all that process, and that's like that added step, that added protection.
Yes, that's literally exactly it. And like I tend to be not very concerned. I'm like, maybe I should be more concerned about this kind of stuff. So for me, that's not something I'm going to do. But for people who are more concerned about that, that's absolutely something you can do. And then when you do self-publish, this is like a weird concept to wrap your head around. Like I honestly haven't totally wrapped my head around it. You are the publisher. So you as human are the publisher. You can also, if you have a business, so say you do have an LLC associated with your blog, that can be the publisher too. So it's kind of up to you if you want to register as like my blog is now an LLC, so I will use that as the publisher for my next book, but you don't have to do that. So there's actually very little legally that you need to do, which feels shocking.
Yeah. It's more to me about, and I feel like what's the tricky part and takes the heavy lifting is, that logistics of getting it to show up in the world and formatting it and, all of that nitty gritty. So, and it's wonderful that you offer all of the insight on that. So, folks go to just go to ducksoven.com and there's just a little tab right there for everything self-publishing.
Yep, exactly. Mm-hmm.
I love it. All right. Let me see. We got 2 more questions and then we'll go because we want to make sure to respect Chelsea's time here today. So we've got a graphic designer and recipe developer. Is she set up well for this?
Absolutely. Like, I think honestly, in the webinar I'm teaching this week, and if anybody has more nitty gritty questions, I encourage you to come to that. You can register at ducksoven.com/webinar. But one of the things I spend time going over is the graphic design portion, because that is what freaks most people out. Is like,
that would freak me out. That freaks me out too.
Yeah. And one of the things we tell people, which like really scares them in addition, is we don't recommend using Canva to design your book for a number of reasons. We actually do teach you how to use Canva for your book if you want to do that anyways, but we don't recommend it. We recommend InDesign. Yeah. So if you have graphic design experience, like, yes.
You're already 2 steps ahead of the process. That was one of the things that I did love in the Cookbook Lab, though. It's like there's literal templates. Like you can which I had never opened InDesign before taking the Cookbook Lab, and then I'm like, oh, this is not so bad. This is not. I mean, just like anything, right? Just like flash photography, just like learning Spanish, just like learning anything. Like it's just you kind of make these things out to be more overwhelming, and then you get in there and you're like, oh, but it's always helpful to have a wonderful guide by your side to walk you through what can be a very daunting desktop in that situation.
Yes, yeah, yep.
I love it. So one more. Oh, she said she's just registered and no Canva.
I always feel terrible. I always just tell people you don't own it if it's on Canva. Like Canva could go away, and so then it's like, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Adobe's not going anywhere. No. So it must be difficult to narrow your original list of recipes to a certain number. What factors do you take into account to end up with that perfect selection?
I love this question. It's literally been on my mind the past couple weeks. For example, with my book, it feels like every book should have like certain sections. And I felt like I should have a dessert section. Yeah. But I was having a lot of trouble making my dessert concepts work because my book is going to be about sous vide meal prep. And I want these to be easy recipes to use for sous vide cooking that you can make ahead. And I was having a hard time making that work for desserts. And I'm like, I'm going to throw this out. And so for me, similar with branding, I try to view my recipes through the lens of what is my intention with this book? Yeah. Who is my audience with this book? And so if a recipe, even if I love it, doesn't fit into that, do you know what I do then? It goes to my food blog list of recipes to make. And so it's like, I can still use that at a different point. It just doesn't work for my book. And one thing I always tell people too, I believe that the value of a cookbook, and other people might disagree with me on this, that's totally fine, is that it's a curated collection with a specific purpose of recipes.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people get freaked out and they're like, is it bad for me to have a recipe that's on my blog also in my book? And I say, no, like, I don't think that should maybe be the case with your entire book, that it should be available on your blog. But if there's some overlap, I think that's fine, because again, the book is bringing all of these things together for you. And that's what makes it so valuable. So to not stress about that too much.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Because the favorite cookbooks that I have are sort of that progression. It's curated. It's a collection that makes sense together in the same way that we talk about any sort of, I think, we were talking about, my husband and I are talking about music albums, like favorite albums. Like, it's not just about the singles. It's about like the whole collection of music all together, and how that takes you on a journey, how that takes you through something, how that brings all of these resources into one place. So that is awesome.
Yeah,
great
absolutely.
point. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Chelsea, for taking the time to spend with us here today. And like I mentioned, everybody, the information on the webinar and all the details, of course, are at aduxoven.com, as well as linked in the description box below. You can vet your concepts. We heard some great concepts here today that we hope to become cookbooks in the future. And I know that speaking for Chelsea and I, we are both so excited about all of the cookbooks and the ideas that you're putting into the world. And we just want to give you the courage that you can do this, right, Chelsea?
It sounds hard. It is hard, but it's doable.
It is absolutely doable. I mean, I would consider us both very intelligent, fabulous people, but we're neither of us rocket scientists. So
yep, exactly. If you can do it, you can do it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here today. And the replay of this will be available right afterward. But otherwise, we'll see y'all later. Take care, everybody.